Welcome to my study, fellow Earthlings. Tonight, we will take an exciting look at Lectionary 1043, a little known but very important manuscript of, well, it's a piece of a manuscript, it's a fragment. But Lectionary 1043 has text from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's a lectionary, as the name implies. So with my cat, Mice, over here, we're going to take a look closer at it and see how much better it is than Codex Vaticanus in all the right ways. Now, Lectionary 1043 is kept in Austria at the National Library in Vienna. For those not familiar with what a lectionary is, lectionaries are 40% of our Greek manuscript evidence, but they're usually ignored. Everybody seems to think, well, once you've seen one lectionary, you've seen them all. But you have never seen a lectionary like this one. Lectionary 1043 is special. Now, there are many different kinds of lectionaries. The main two kinds are the Synaxarion and the Minologion. The Synaxarion begins on Easter. All dates are adjusted in the year to when Easter begins. And then you have the Minologion, which is fixed to the civil year. And you have fixed dates for that. So that's like a date on the calendar would be in the Minologion. But with the Synaxarion, everything gets fit to Easter. Whenever Easter is, that's when the reading comes. Now, Chrysostom, Augustine, and Ambrose all mention the use of Gospels lecture cycles. In the days of Chrysostom, in both Antioch and Constantinople, lectionaries were in use for most of the New Testament. There's really not a whole lot of evidence that Revelation was ever in the Byzantine lectionary. So, as a consequence, when it comes to Revelation, we really don't have a single text that can be called, this is the Byzantine text. It's more like, this is the majority text. So, for Byzantine, limit that to Matthew through Jude. Here we see Lectionary 1043. This is the whole thing. You see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pages. Now, this 9th page is that's the front and back of this is the off print of that. This is the reverse or the see-through. So what can we see in Lectionary 1043? Let's take a look. Let's go hunting. Hunting we will go, hunting we will go. Our job is very tedious and very, very slow. First we see election breaks. At the end of Matthew 10:39, which is the same as the election break in Vaticanus. This is also the end of section 97, so there's nothing too special about that. You see, for the other second breaks, you can see them all listed here. And the end, they begin or end, as far as we can tell, at sensible breaks in the narrative. Now we can't always tell where election begins or ends because we don't have the whole manuscript. We have only a fragment. For what we do have, this is a pretty good guess at estimate of where the lectionary began or ended. So first we have a page with readings taken from Matthew 7, Matthew 10, and Matthew 3. Matthew 3 is important because that's when Jesus gets baptized. So this will be a lection that will be used for baptisms. A very, very significant passage. In Matthew 7, we see an aun added. Now, aun is, I'd say, far too often when you see aun, it's not original, because this was something that readers would say simply to convey a break in the sense. In the manuscript, we also see in 1037 an uncontracted word for son, Now, scribes usually would contract this word as a sacred name, but in this case, it is not contracted. We see the Alexandrian spelling in Matthew 10:41, but in Matthew 10:42 we see Byzantine spelling. So even though it's mainly Alexandrian, we do see Byzantine readings pop up from here and there. So everything you see here in red is Alexandrian. What you see in blue is Byzantine. And what you see in black is a little quirk here and there. Or just a little note of something unusual. The spelling in Matthew 3:17, in agreement with Codex L and Codex W, that is notable. Notice that in Matthew 3:11, it includes and fire. Now this is missing in the Byzantine text. This is a case where the Alexandrian reading is longer. We also see missing the name John in verse 14. And we see the word order agreeing with the Alexandrian text. In Matthew 4, we see again Alexandrian in verse 23, but in verse 24 and 5:1, it agrees with the Byzantine text. In 5:11, it does not have the word for word. In 5:11, pseudomonoi is unusually placed. It's after Inikinimao. So something interesting is going on in 5:11. So here is the manuscript. Now I've gone through it. I have gone through it in blue, but you can rewind the video to the page where I don't have it marked up and see the text. All of these readings have been confirmed visually. In Matthew 4, like I said before, we have both Alexandrian and Byzantine readings side by side. Then we move over to Mark. We begin in Mark 6, which is an interesting chapter because that's where we have the famous account of John the Baptist getting his head cut off. And then we have Luke chapter 2, the beginning of the Christmas story. So, John's departure and Jesus' arrival in Bethlehem. Now, this little reading here that I circled in green, that is very significant. We're going to get into that when we have the list of variants. So here we go. We see mainly Alexandrian in red, agreeing with that core group of Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, and Codex L. That's pretty much how you can tell what is or isn't Alexandrian. It agrees with 2 out of these 3 Alexandrian. But having the Lectionary 10:43 in the mix, that gives us a slightly larger pool to work from. Because as a whole, I would say Lectionary 10:43's text is even more Alexandrian than Codex Regius 019. Also, Lectionary 10:43 confirms in 623 the simple reading Alta, not Paula. I believe that better analysis will result in a change in the UBS text without the word Paula, because it just seems to be only coincidence that it happens to agree with Mark's style. In terms of external evidence, Aute is the better reading. So we see in 26, another Byzantine reading pops up. But if we look at verse 22, her daughter. Her daughter, not his. So in ET readers, I think you have some heavy weight against the reading that has been chosen in the NET. Definitely here we have early support for her daughter. So moving on into Luke. Further on in the Christmas story, we have some interesting readings, mostly Alexandrian, but here and there, something else. In Luke 2:4, the word Nazareth is spelled with a theta. In verse 5, we don't have the word Gunaki. We don't have the word. And we don't have the word behold. But in verse 14, we have Eurykia. Ah, interesting. So, in case you're wondering how we should read Luke 2:14, is it peace on earth, goodwill toward men? Or peace on earth, goodwill toward those whom God likes? Here we have support for Eurykia, which is the Byzantine reading, not the Alexandrian reading. We also have another Byzantine reading in verse 16. And again, in Luke 11, mostly Alexandrian, but in verse 28, Byzantine. So, some especially significant takeaways from this is her daughter in Mark 6:22. And the other ones you see here, no betrothed in Luke 2:5, that's already implied by context. You can understand how somebody would actually want to add it to make the reading clearer. But you can also see internally, Lectionary 10.4.3 is right by not having it. Also, you don't have the corrupt Alexandrian reading in Luke 2:14, but again, we have a reading that agrees with the Byzantine text. In this case, in a manuscript that not from the Byzantine text stream, transmission stream, this is definitely a manuscript that is primarily Alexandrian. So this definitely should be added to the apparatus. And then finally, in John 20, we have the off-printing here, or the reverse ink. You don't have many variants. So let's take a close look at the little ones you do have. We'll see that in John 20, there's nothing of consequence, really. There's a chi after Aun. There's the Alexandrian readings for 2 and so forth. In verse 10, we have an unusual reading. Nothing too drastic or anything. So what is the takeaway from this little journey through Lectionary 10.4.3? It is very strongly Alexandrian, aligned with O3, that is Vaticanus, but it also has some Byzantine readings. Where did they come from? They didn't come from the Byzantine text, because this is clearly in the Alexandrian transmission line. So they came from an exemplar. Before there was Lectionary, there was a copy from which the text was taken. This text of Lectionary 10.4.3 conveys the same message as the Byzantine text without the major corruptions found in Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Also, the uncontracted word for son indicates an extremely early exemplar for Lectionary 10.4.3. So before these passages were put into lectionary form, in the continuous text exemplar, it was very early to the autographs. It was so early that they hadn't even made the contraction of the sacred name Son. So I encourage you to take a close look at Lectionary 10.4.3, recognizing the passages that it contains. We do have allies for Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, so hopefully this will decrease the amount of paranoid anti-Egyptian bias, because so many people in the King James Only movement say, "Oh, it's from Egypt; it has to be bad." No, That is not the case in this case. God is no respecter of persons. We should be no respecters of manuscripts. We should simply evaluate them on the basis of the merits. So I hope you enjoyed this little tour. Keep studying. I hope it's given you some food for thought. And when you study for God, give Him your best effort. Good night.